All right, so welcome to our session. Today, I am going to be going over the Global Engineering Exchange, aka the GE3 program. So if you've been getting some of our emails or looking on our website, you might notice this little GE3 asterisk attached to some of the programs. So my goal for today is to just explain what that means, talk about the structure of the program, and then answer any questions you might have. All right, so quick intro. So my name is Tiffany Coman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an advisor coordinator with International Programs in Engineering, aka IPE. And I've also attached my email there just in case you need to reach out to me. And I am the lead advisor for GE3. So for all of the GE3 schools, I will advise on, and I'll be the primary UMISH contact for those programs. And then a quick agenda. So we'll do an overview of the GE3 program. We'll talk about the application process. We'll quickly go through some of our highlighted universities for this upcoming winter, and then we'll talk about some next steps. All right, so quick introduction to the Global Engineering Education Exchange, aka GE3. So GE3 was established in the 90s, and basically the IIE, which is the Institute of International Education based in DC, saw that a lot of like science, arts, like foreign language students were studying abroad, but there was this really big gap in STEM students, particularly like engineering students studying abroad. So they created this consortium or this group of universities who would essentially just work together to create some sort of engineering exchange or study abroad experiences. And it's been going since then. Now there's about 70 members worldwide. About half of them are located here in the US, the other half abroad. And the big features of this program is that it's an exchange program, which means that you will be charged tuition. And then also there's opportunities for language immersion. So some of the partner universities have a lot of coursework that's taught in their local language. And it's also nice because you get to study alongside local students at these universities. So you can meet a lot of local students as well, as opposed to some of our other programs where you're predominantly with maybe US students or other study abroad students. All right, so this is the full list of GE3 participants, so you can kind of go through. As you see, there's a lot of variety, so not just throughout Europe where a lot of our programs are located, but we also have some partners in Asia, South America, and even other parts of North America like Mexico as well. So all of these universities are potentially ones you could go to as part of the GE3 exchange or list on your application as universities of interest, other than the US schools, obviously. All right, and then eligibility criteria. So you must be currently enrolled in the College of Engineering or be a CSLSA student in good academic standing, which means just not on any type of academic probation, a 3.0 or above GPA, and then you must have a passport that will be valid for at least 6 months beyond the end date of the program by the time you apply. So if you do not currently have a passport that meets this criteria, over the summer is a great time to renew that passport or apply for a passport just so you're all set by the application period. I will point out though that each host institution might have additional criteria for admission. So some of them might have their own GPA standard, usually not higher than a 3.0, or they might have other things that they're looking for. And we can always discuss those together once you have a concrete idea of what host institutions you might be interested in. So the application process very quickly. So by September 12th, you will apply simultaneously to IPE and GE3. And then this is just a note that the GE3 application won't open until August 1st, but the IPE one is already open, so you can start beginning to work on that now. But the GE3 one won't open until August 1st. And we have a link on as part of our application that will link you to the GE3 application, so you don't have to worry about finding that by yourself or anything. And then what happens after that? So after September 12th passes, within a week, but usually within like a few days, we will send you some sort of notification that you have been nominated to GE3. So this means that we've looked through your application, you meet the eligibility criteria, and we've decided that we will endorse your application to GE3. And then from there, GE3 will spend a couple of weeks doing what they call their placement process. So they'll look at your application, they'll look at the schools you listed interest in, and they will place you kind of in a best fit based on like academics, like living preferences, things like that. And then they will then forward your application to your host school for final approval. And this is just a note that most of the schools will require some sort of additional application step once you've been accepted by them. It's usually just more so kind of, it's not like they're going to deny you through this additional application piece. It's more so just them getting like your transcript information, getting some of your personal information. So that's all uploaded into their system as well. And some key requirements for the IPE application. It's not super time consuming. The most time consuming part is probably the 2 short essays. So one will be about 500 words on why you want to go on this experience, and another one 250 words about an and recent intercultural experience. So I usually recommend don't spend, days and days and days working on these essays, staying up super late. It's low stakes writing, so just put a little bit of effort in and then usually you're fine. You do also have to submit a course backpack, so just it doesn't have to be finalized. It can just be a general idea of the courses you're planning to take while you're abroad. There is also a required advising, one-on-one advising meeting with me, the lead advisor, which you can do anytime starting now or throughout the summer before the application deadline. And then you'll also have to upload your passport information. So next we'll go into some of our highlighted universities. And as I mentioned before, these are not the only schools you can go abroad through the GE3 program. These are just ones that we've selected because we've either had students go there in the recent past, or we just think that they have curriculum that lines up with what our students might be interested in. So these are the 6 that we have chosen to highlight for winter 2025, DTU in Denmark, NTU in Singapore, Lund in Sweden, the University of Newcastle in Australia, KAIST in South Korea, and then Sheffield in the UK. So as I mentioned, you can really go to any of these schools here, but I think it's important to note that each school kind of has a different number of students that they can accommodate on exchange. So if you see here on kind of this far right corner, the limited capacity schools versus here on the left, the flexible capacity schools. So anything you see here in the limited capacity schools means that it's going to be a little bit more competitive to be placed at that school. So if your top choice is one of these ones, so like DTU or NTU, it's highly recommended that you have a second and third choice that are maybe from one of these more flexible or moderate schools. I would say if your top choice is one of these like flexible and moderate schools, I wouldn't worry too much about not getting your top choice. But in general, we will recommend having at least 2 to 3 schools listed on your application. That way it increases your likelihood of being placed somewhere. And I will note that when GE3 is doing their placement process, they won't place you at like just some random university. They'll place you somewhere that you listed on your application. But if you only list one of these more limited schools, that does increase the chance that you might not get placed there, which is why we advise having some backups. But yes, if you're in one of the schools that is more flexible, I wouldn't worry too much. All right, and then academics. So each university has kind of a different handful of courses that have already been pre-approved in our database, which is linked down here. So you can see like DTU, for instance, there's some EECS courses, IOE, MECEng. But these schools, as I'll talk about in a minute, all have a variety of different engineering disciplines. Just we might not have gotten those courses pre-approved yet, which I'll talk about later on in the presentation as well. And it's also very important to note that some universities will have a minimum number of engineering courses you have to take. So a lot of them request at least half of the courses you take are from their College of Engineering. And then all of the courses that you plan to take should be submitted for approval via the transfer credit approval form, which again, we'll talk about a bit more later on. So first, our first highlight university is Nanyang Technical University, aka NTU in Singapore. So dates, usually their semester lines up pretty well with ours, usually early January to early May. They have a lot of very similar engineering departments that UMIPE has, so aerospace, BME, chemical, civil, mechanical, and math sci. But one very important note about NTU is that they do not accept CS students and that CS courses are not open for exchange. So if you are a CS major and you want to go to NTU, it is still possible. You just can't take any CS coursework because it's oversubscribed and they don't have enough space for exchange students. And they are one of these universities that will require at least half of your courses have to be taken from the engineering school. And students typically take about 4 to 5 courses per semester, so that would be about 2 to 3 engineering specific courses. But they do have non-engineering courses available as well. So they do have some business courses, some entrepreneurship courses, humanities, and they do also require an additional application after you are nominated. They do also have on-campus housing available. We do have a student who's there right now and she's living on campus, very traditional kind of dorm, and any housing fees you pay directly to them. But as I mentioned, NTU is a very limited placement capacity, so highly recommend to have a backup if this is your first choice or your school of interest. And then next, the University of Sheffield. So we also have a student who's currently there right now as well. Their dates are a little bit different to UMich. They typically start mid to late February and go through June. So that's something to consider if you're thinking about like your summer after you go abroad or internships or anything like that. And then very similar engineering disciplines. They have aerospace, bioengineering, chemical, CS, civil, electrical, mechanical. And Sheffield is also unique in that it has a pretty large international student population. So not just study abroad students, but they also have a lot of international degree seeking students, which is really cool. They do also require an additional app after your placement, and university accommodation is available, but not guaranteed. But I believe most of our students who have gone to Sheffield have been able to secure university accommodation. So I wouldn't worry too much about not being able to get off-campus housing. And then as you see there, it's kind of in the middle of England. So a couple hours train ride away from Manchester, a couple hours train ride away from London. It's a smaller town, so not as big of a city as like a London or a Manchester. All right, and then KAIST, so the Korea's Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, similar to Sheffield, their dates are going to start in late February and go through late June. So another consideration for those with summer plans. And they're engineering focused school, so they have a wide variety of different engineering departments and majors. And they do also require that half of the courses you take have to be from the department you enroll in. So this is important to make sure that you select the correct major. So if you're CS, make sure you select computer science. That way you can make sure you get the courses from the correct department. They do also require an additional application after nomination. And they do have on-campus accommodation available, but again, not guaranteed. But most students do end up living on campus in their dorms. And this university is unique. It's not located in Seoul, which is up here towards the northern part of South Korea, but it's kind of in the middle, but it's only about an hour away from Seoul, like via the bullet train. So very close to the major cities, but more of a smaller cities kind of suburb vibe. All right, and then next we have DTU, so the Technical University of Denmark, another university that has kind of the February to late May timeline usually. Lots of engineering disciplines available, including architectural engineering, which is really cool. So they do require another app after you're placed there. And again, on-campus housing available, not always guaranteed. And similar to Sheffield, they have a very large international student population and lots of student clubs. So we had a couple students who went to DTU, not this year, but the year before. And they got involved in a lot of the student activities and made a lot of friends that way. And it's in Lyngby. So if you see here, it's a little bit outside of Copenhagen, not too far, maybe about like half an hour or so. So again, smaller town kind of vibe, but you're very close to a big city. All right, and then last but not least, we have the University of Newcastle in Australia. So another late February to late June timeline, very similar engineering disciplines to UMich, and another school where they ask at least half of those courses are taken in engineering. They have both on and off-campus accommodations available, as well as homestays. And Newcastle is a really cool city. It's only a few minutes away from like the beach. It's a very coastal city. And then if you look on the map here, it looks like it's very close to Sydney, but it's actually like a couple hours away from Sydney because Australia is so huge. So Newcastle, as opposed to Sydney, a little bit more laid back. You're right on the beach, but then if you do want to go to Sydney or other parts of Australia for travel, you're just a couple hours away by train. All right, and then last we have Lund University. So their calendar goes mid-January to mid-June. Very similar disciplines to UMich, like a lot of the other schools. Most notably, they have biomedical and chemical engineering. Half those courses do have to be taken from the engineering department, and they do also, like a lot of the other schools, require an additional application. On-campus accommodation is available, but not guaranteed. But usually our students do live on campus. And they, similar to Sheffield, also have a very large international student community, both study abroad students and students seeking degrees. And Lund is kind of in an interesting location in Sweden. It's a little more south. So it's actually closer to Copenhagen than it is to Stockholm, which is like the capital of Sweden. So it's less than an hour away from Copenhagen, but about like 3 hours or so away from Stockholm. Again, more of a smaller city. So if you're someone who gets maybe overwhelmed by super big cities, Lund is a nice, like mostly college town sort of vibe. All right. So those are just our highlighted universities very quickly. Of course, if you have any questions about those specific schools, you can always talk to me and we can get a little bit more in depth, or I can point you to some resources like their websites or their exchange student info sheets where you can get a little bit more info. So next we'll talk about, are you a good fit for the GE3 program? So maybe one of those schools sounds really interesting to you, but you're just not sure if it might be the right one. So are you independent? Are you not really looking for a UM-dominated study abroad experience? So a lot of the other IPE programs, we send pretty big cohorts of Michigan students. So you might be with like 20 or 30 other Michigan students. And some people really like that because like they know their friends are going or they know other people that they can relate to are going. But if you're someone who, you want to do something a little bit more disconnected from maybe not surrounded by a bunch of Michigan people while you're abroad, the GE3 program could definitely be a good fit. Usually because we don't send more than like a couple of students to each school each semester. And also the GE3 program is great if you're looking to study in a location that's not offered by other IPE programs. So like I mentioned, like there's options in the Middle East, there's options in Latin America, there's a lot of Asia options that IPE doesn't normally offer. So the GE3 program could be a good route to go through some of those. Oh, bye, Joseph. Okay. So sorry, just saying bye to someone who had to jump out really quickly. And then also the GE3 program might be a good fit for those who want to study alongside local students. So some IPE programs are housed at study centers with other study abroad students or other American students. And some students say, like, I really wish I could just like study with a local or study with someone who actually goes to a university in this country. And the GE3 program is a perfect way to do that. Because all of these schools, you'll be taking classes with local students and you'll be able to really immerse yourself in the local student culture and the local community. So if you answered yes to any of the above, you might be a really good fit for GE3, and I would encourage you to do a little bit more research into some of the schools and also work with me to find a good fit for you. All right, so what to consider when you're choosing schools? So maybe you already have a school in mind, but you're looking for a couple of backups, or maybe you don't have a school in mind and you're like just wondering, how do I pick the GE3 school that will be best for me? So first, I would say the biggest factor is usually academics and courses. So you'd want to explore, does the school offer a major that's similar to mine? Do they offer some courses that are already pre-approved or could be approved for credit towards my degree? That's going to be the biggest factor. And that's often the most time-consuming factor to consider as well. So I definitely recommend setting aside a little bit of time to explore these academic options, explore the classes, submit things for transfer credit if you have to, just to see what school might be viable for you academically. Next to consider is the semester dates. So like I noted, some of the schools, they don't follow the US calendar. So if you're someone who you already know, like I'm going to do an internship in May, or I already know I'm going, on vacation on these dates. That's also something to consider. Some of those schools that go into late June might not work or be super compatible with your schedule. So that's something else to consider. Next, I would also consider location. So are you interested in something that's a little bit more urban, being in like a really big city, or are you more comfortable in like the suburbs, like a college town, something that's a little bit less crowded? Next to consider is also weather. So for instance, Australia is really nice during the winter semester because it is summer in the Southern Hemisphere during that time. So a lot of our students love going to Australia in the winter, as opposed to somewhere like Sweden or Denmark, where they tend to have harsher winters. So if you're looking to escape Michigan winter, maybe those locations wouldn't be the best fit for you. Another thing is to consider cost of living and also flight costs. So for instance, cost of living in a place like Denmark or Sweden can be pretty high compared to the cost of living, let's say, in like Hong Kong or Colombia. So that's also something to consider, is how much will your groceries cost? How much will toiletries, just everyday living things cost, as well as flights. So generally, the farther you go, the more expensive the flight will be. So Australia is great, but those flights can get pretty pricey compared to like a flight to Europe. Next is to consider institutional capacity. So as I mentioned in one of the beginning slides, each school kind of has a different number of students that they can accommodate each semester. So if you are thinking of a school that is a little bit more restrictive in its capacity, that and a little bit more competitive, you might want to, like I said, consider some backups or consider some other institutions that have more flexible capacity. That way you don't have to worry too much about competition. And last, but certainly not least in your consideration, should be your personal needs. So if you have certain health accommodations, lifestyle preferences, identities, you should do a little bit research of what living with those things can be like in your host country. So for instance, if you have asthma, you might want to look up what's the air quality like in these different countries, because some places might be a little bit more manageable for you than others. So all important things to consider when picking your host schools. All right, and then we do have a little bit of insight into the student experience at some of these schools. So we have some bloggers, and I've linked them there on our Tumblr. But if you are interested in any of these schools, I'm happy to connect you with some students who have gone there before. Or if we don't have any students from Michigan who have gone there recently, GE3 is also very happy to connect us with students from other schools who have studied at these institutions and can give you a little bit more insight into the student experience and what that's like. All right, so to wrap up here, we're going to talk about some next steps. So now you've decided, okay, you're definitely interested in GE3, you want to learn more, where do you begin? So first, I would say a good first step is to identify at least 2 to 3 GE schools that you are interested in or could be viable for you. So what I've linked on the slide here is, it has the full list of GE3 schools along with their program pages where you can find their course catalogs, information about housing, information about the school in general. So I highly recommend just going through that list, picking a couple that might stand out to you. And then from there, you're going to want to begin what I was talking about, that course identification process and seeing if things are academically viable. So first, you're going to want to browse through the host school's course catalog to see what they offer. Most schools probably won't have their winter 2025 offerings posted yet, but you can kind of get a rough idea of what courses might be available based on either the 2024 or the 2023 versions of that catalog. And then next, you'll want to consult the COE course equivalency database, which we've linked in an earlier slide, for any courses that might already be pre-approved. And then from there, you'll want to make sure you submit your transfer credit approval forms for courses that have not been approved yet. So just because you see it in the catalog doesn't mean it's been approved for transfer equivalency. So that's why it's really important to check that COE database. And this process can take a while because it takes a while to explore the catalogs, to get the materials you need for equivalency, to submit the equivalency forms. So I recommend starting this pretty early and working on this over the summer kind of continuously. That way you can have a good idea of what courses might be approved by the time you're ready to go abroad. And if there's any questions about the course approval process, feel free to schedule a meeting with me, or send me an email. I'm happy to talk through it. Each school kind of has a different way that they set up their course catalogs, and sometimes it can be a little bit confusing to navigate. So I'm happy to sit down with you and go through those and show you how to find those classes. And then from there, you're just going to want to work with your academic advisor to craft some sort of long-term plan and determine how those classes that you've gotten approved might count towards your degree requirements, just to make sure you stay on track for graduation. And then after that, you'll want to meet with me just to talk about some more logistics of your school, your application, and the process. And then finally, by September 12th, you'll complete that IPE and GE3 application. So in short, definitely next steps, identify those schools and begin that course approval process, and then we can kind of go from there. All right, and then I will go ahead and stop our recording here. Thank you for listening to me today, and then we will have time for questions.